Man and dolphins have always shown a curiosity towards each other. Since ancient times, stories of friendships between dolphins and humans have been widely documented, yet only now are we beginning to realize their relevance. This is the most unique of stories, a story of hope, of miracles, of faith and determination, of one woman's refusal to limit her son's potential, which has given birth to the possibility of well-being for others. Dean Paul Anderson was born March 7, 1986, with severe Down syndrome, and as his mother Kathy explains, the prognosis was bleak.
As soon as they handed him to me, it was very obvious that he had Down syndrome. He had no muscle tone. He had no response at all to any personal interaction between me or the girls or his father. They told me he would never have a thought process. If he ever walked, he'd be 5 or 6 years old. That the absolute most that we could ever hope for is maybe someday he could feed himself and dress himself. They gave me a stack of information that told me that he would live to be maybe 55 years old if he was kept in good health. It had made me so angry that they put a life expectancy on my child that I threw everything in the trash and decided that I would not put any limits on this child, that I would know that every day was a bonus, and anything that he ever did was going to be a bonus, and we'd start from there and just see what happened. Well, he sat up at 4 months, he crawled at 6 months, and he walked at 9 months. But he still would not communicate, he still did not respond to any personal interaction. It was real difficult for us as a family that he wasn't warmer to us and more responsive to us.
During these first 3 years of his life, Dean Paul lived in a world completely of his own, not wanting to give up on her son and believing that somehow she could break through this communication barrier. Kathy continued to try anything to make contact.
So I started working for ways to help him, knowing there had to be something somewhere in this universe to help this child. So I took him to the zoo to see if anything would spark his interest. And something did. It was the dolphins in the Aquatica show. And he sat up, his eyes flew open, and he watched these dolphins intently. He just loved every moment of it. And then after it was over with, the trainer said, "Come and let him watch us feed the dolphins." Well, the dolphins didn't go to their food, they came to Dean Paul. And it was real obvious that there was a real significant bonding going on there.
This encounter with the dolphins was the first time Dean Paul had ever attempted to communicate with the world around him. The trainers were shocked by their dolphins' response to this little boy. They had never seen them act this way towards anyone before.
I saw Dean Paul when he was very young, when he was just entering dolphin-assisted therapy with Dave Nathanson. And he looked, for all intents and purposes, like a stereotypical Downs. He had very little vocal skills. His motor skills were awkward. His social skills he was very introspective, very reserved, and his social skills did not seem developed for a child of his age. I believe he was 4 at that time.
Dr. Nathanson was convinced that there was something more to dolphin-human interaction, but his program lacked compelling results. All of that was about to change, though, when Kathy showed up with Dean Paul.
The key element in what we were doing is really to try and get Dean Paul to increase his attention. Neurologically, what happens is, in order to process information, you have to pay attention. It's that simple. When stimuli come in through one or more of the senses, you've got to be able to focus long enough so that the brain can do something with it. In Dean Paul's case, as is the case with many children with disabilities, and Down syndrome specifically, there's a short attention span, and that short attention span really is the major drawback to learning. Cow. Good work, Dean Paul.
Good job.
That was very good. In Dean Paul's case, as he became more and more fascinated with the dolphins, that arc really developed. He could look at it for 10 seconds or 15 seconds because he knew the reward he was going to get was to get in the water with the dolphins. Dean Paul's work with the dolphins has improved his confidence dramatically. Now you see him walking by himself, actually initiating behaviors, reaching out to Shane to help other children. This is very characteristic of the kind of general improvement we see in kids. But in Dean Paul's case, the improvement has been really from a child who was totally within himself to a very outgoing child, from really a child who was very inner-directed to a child who is now outer-directed. The gregarious Dean Paul you see is not the same quiet, shy, withdrawn Dean Paul that I saw years ago.
Dean Paul's breakthroughs made headlines worldwide, and he became a symbol of hope for dolphin-assisted therapy. In an effort to better understand the effect swimming with dolphins has on the mind, David Cole tests the brainwaves before and after the children interact with the dolphins.
We began testing neurological impact, brain waves before and after dolphin interaction, because there's been anecdotal reports for as long as people have been getting in the water with dolphins about a heightened sensory state or a state of euphoria after interacting with dolphins in close proximity. So it made perfect sense to begin to study what the actual changes in brain waves were before and after. And we did discover that there's a specific change in neurological state, which does indicate a euphoric response, a definite specific state of mind that's different than when the subject entered the water.
One of the most important elements of the dolphin therapy is the free swim in the deep pool. It is through this full submersion that the dolphins have complete range of the participants and are able to swim freely above and below them. The repetition between the encounter pool and the deep pool is also an integral part of the dolphin-assisted therapy. The first part consists of a more structured swim, while the second half of the session allows for spontaneous interactions with the dolphins.
I think the most fascinating thing about the efficacy of dolphin-assisted therapy is that it seems to work on a disparate group of disorders, from physical disorders, neurological disorders, psychological disorders. There's equal efficacy. With Shane, for instance, he's suffering from Down syndrome. With John, he's suffering from a neuromuscular disorder. They've both taken part in exactly the same program, side by side, and yet Shane's situation is incredibly different from John's. Both of the symptoms have been alleviated. I think that that's really the most interesting thing about dolphin-assisted therapy, is that its efficacy in such a wide variety of disorders, and physical disorders and neurological disorders, immunosuppressive disorders such as cancer. In all of those instances, there's effectiveness in dolphin-assisted therapy, and I think that that gives us an opportunity, kind of a window on the disease process, because this interaction seems to move an organism under a wide variety of disorders towards health. And it gives us an opportunity to take a scientific look at each of those individual disorders and how to interfere with the disease process. I think that's by far the most exciting thing about what's going on in dolphin-assisted therapy.
The dolphins want to communicate. They don't know what channel the person communicates on. They blast the person with a wide band of frequencies. Some of those frequencies are absorbed into the body and disappear. Some of them are reflected back to the dolphin. We know now that the ones that reflect back to the dolphin are also the ones that are missing out of the voice, missing out of the brain waves, and missing out of the spectral signature of the person, because the body won't absorb them. The dolphin at this point narrows down to that one frequency, thinking that that's the frequency that the individual is communicating on, and begins to blast the person with that frequency. Now, whether they're doing that as a healing gesture or whether they're doing that just to try to communicate is the $64 million question right now. So with regards to Dean Paul and some of these others that are experiencing healing phenomena with regards to the dolphins, it appears that it might have something to do with the dolphin's ability to analyze that spectral signature and then be able to generate back a pattern that in some way harmonizes or balances or synchronizes that individual's spectral signature. One of the most interesting things regarding this phenomenon is that if you boil it down to the bottom line, it comes down to communication. So their ability to create a wide range of frequencies and then shape that frequency to have a specific spectral signature to it, I think makes them the greatest communicative device in the known universe.
If we use this combined information, this scientific approach, together with a good ethical process, then I think we can together advance ourselves. And I think this is one of those treasures, perhaps, that God has hidden in his creation that allows us to take care of ourselves, to use our intellect, to use that sort of dominion process to be good stewards of what we have and be creative.